right now. Great. As we get started, so first, before we jump into the session, I just wanted to introduce who is M-Shule, who are we, why are we talking about motivating learning over SMS? So M-Shule is a personalized SMS learning and training platform based in Nairobi, Kenya. We provide educational skills, knowledge building, all sorts of information to the offline and remote populations that we're trying to work with who may not have smartphones or internet connectivity to actually gain these skills. We were founded in 2017. To date, we have worked with almost 20,000 learners actually, and we have been able to provide great increases in education and literacy and numeracy, and also skilled domains like financial literacy, health education during COVID, and all sorts of other things. We also do data collection and can do assessments and surveys over text. And we have a lot of experience understanding how we can really drive more learning development, even for people who are remote and maybe using a learning platform digitally for the very first time. So that is who we are. And today we are going to be going through how can you actually increase engagement even for these remote learners. This is a really important topic, especially as people have been home. We haven't been able to do in-person learning for many, many months now. Hopefully soon we'll be able to get back to class. But how can you actually ensure that people are not just getting access to platforms, but they're actually encouraged and excited to continue through all of the learning content? So we'll be talking about that today in following this agenda here. And I am not here alone. I am excited to be here with my colleagues who I will allow to briefly introduce themselves before we go on with the session. So Lydia, can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Claire. My name is Lydia Njuguna. I work at M-Shule as the coordinator for projects and account management. And previously, I've worked on so many projects in the health sector, education sector, and life skills and livelihoods. And yeah, I've had first-hand experience working with learners and users, and I'm very excited to share my experience and tips with all of us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. And please, Albina, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Albina Mumbi. I am the Operations and Account Management Associate in M-Shule. I'm really excited to see all of you and to share our amazing ideas and what has worked for us. And please feel free and welcome all. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So let's get going. So first, what motivates learning? So what are the challenges that I know we all know very well about making sure that learners are actually going through the learning content that we provide? One of the, again, the big challenges and big goals during COVID has been providing better access to learning tools. But I'm sure once we provide access to the learning tools, how do we know that learners are actually going through this content? I would like everyone to write in the chat if you've been providing a digital learning tool or options, what are the challenges that you've faced in ensuring learners are actually completing the courses? So we'll just take a few minutes for everyone to add your thoughts into the chat. Awesome. So I'm seeing a lot of issues coming up that I think are probably very, very familiar to many of us. So there's issues of access. So people don't have just general connection to the internet or to smartphones that will allow them to actually use the great learning content that people want to provide. I'm seeing issues of motivation. People are not able to, people say that they want access to certain tools, but then they just don't use them when they have them. So there's issues around that. There's problems when people are at home instead of in the learning environment. People just simply don't have time. So I'm seeing, things like time management, the learning process control, all of these and competing activities, all of these make it challenging for people to learn in a home environment as opposed to an educational environment. So these are all challenges that we've encountered as well. Of course, using SMS, there's some, we overcome some of those issues in M-Shule for when it comes to data connectivity. But this issue of behavior change is really what we're going to dig into today. So what exactly do I mean by behavior change? So simply stated, behavior change is when you want someone to do something a bit different in their daily lives and adjust their daily habits a little bit. And so I think we're all very familiar when we want to do something new, there's a process of reorienting your habits or reorienting the way you live your life. And this year has been an incredible study in behavior change, right? Forced by the pandemic. People's lives have been completely upended. And there's many things that we need to think about when we talk about when it comes to motivation, how can we ensure that we're aligning the motivations and the want and the desire to learn with actual practically encouraging people to change their behavior? So there's challenges that we're facing of remote learning is just harder. You're trying to learn how to use a tech tool for the first time as opposed to sitting and speaking with someone. There's competing priorities. There's expectations of learning feeling a certain way that, remote learning tools don't necessarily align to. And of course, there's a social benefit. We like going to school and we like going to workshops because then we can see our friends and work together to gain these skills. And these are the things that you don't necessarily get in a digital learning environment. So there's a lot of things to think about, and there's a lot of research that's been done to help us understand, okay, how can we move people from their behavior of sitting physically in a classroom to learn and get them excited to integrate learning digitally into those daily lives. So I'm sure we're all familiar with this idea of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and really good engagement and motivational strategies rely on both. So intrinsically, we think about kind of what we're calling ARC, so autonomy, relatedness, and competence. These are psychologically motivating factors because autonomy, you have the right to, or you have the ability to choose the type of learning that you're going to engage with. Relatedness, you get to build relationships with others in your community. And competence, you get to improve a skill and become better and more successful at doing something. So these are really critical motivators for people intrinsically. And then of course, extrinsically, people are motivated by a reward or avoiding punishment. So I'm sure we're very familiar with things like financial incentives or points or winning a competition. But then the best motivation strategies that you can use in your digital learning programs are ones that feed into both at the same time. And so this is just going through, again, autonomy, relatedness, and competence for intrinsic motivation, and then how you can use extrinsic motivation to plug into these. So today we're going to talk about some of the best practices that we have learned in the past 6 to 7 months and before for how we can motivate individuals and groups to actually learn at home. So we really boiled this down into this simple framework that we hope you can also use for individuals. The two things that really excite learners we found are marks, so grades, things like achievement, getting certifications, and money, financial returns. Even if it's not immediate financial returns, whatever people are learning, if it's directly related to improving your job opportunities or getting higher incomes. So those are the two things we're focusing on that we've learned are the two things that really drive people who are individuals. But then also looking at learning cohorts and groups, it's really powerful to think about competition and collaboration. So rewarding top performers, just as people are used to being rewarded in classrooms, and then collaboration. So also, how can you encourage digitally people to work together? So that is what we'll be focusing on today. And on that note, I will pass it over to my colleague Lydia, who will be digging into these in more depth.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that wonderful introduction. And now, as she's mentioned, we are going to talk about some strategies that you can provide your individuals learners to help them get excited and actually engage with the content you want them to engage in and go ahead and finish the courses. So first off, as mentioned, we're going to start with marks. And when we say marks, what you're talking about is some sort of proof or demonstration of some achievement. I know after sitting maybe through like an evaluation, that's the first thing that we all look forward to. And yeah, and that is what we relate to what we've actually engaged in. So why does marks work, or how does it work? Marks works one as an intrinsic and also as an extrinsic motivator to learners. As an intrinsic one, it gives the learner that feeling of competency and autonomy, while extrinsically it gives them that that sense of pride, and also it opens up job opportunities when one can use these marks to show when looking for and expanding their career. And when you think about marks as a motivator, there are various things that you can actually consider, various options that you can think about. And you can use, for example, certificates, progress reports, performance analysis. And also, yeah, you can also decide to go the virtual way because we've seen the world moving, getting tilted towards that direction, and use, virtual badges or even strengths. And but today we are going to focus mostly on certificates, which are seemingly very simple, but should be carefully employed and set up in programs to make sure that you get the best out of certificates as a motivator. So when do you use as a certificate? You use certificate when you're looking to motivate a large group of learners and as a low-cost strategy. And certificates can also be used for academic or livelihoods programs that aim at increasing skills and also opening up job opportunities. At M-Shule, when you're looking at certificates as a motivator, we look at it in three ways. One, we look at what do we want to reward? How often do you want to reward this? And finally, we look at the implementation bit of it. So when we talk about what to reward, we really think closely about the behavior that we want our learners to adopt and the call of action which we are calling upon these learners. And the different options that we think about in regards to this is, for example, completion of courses in a given amount of time. Maybe it could be like answering a certain number of questions, or also doing a particular number of lessons also. And something else also to think about is in terms of merit. We could award certificate maybe to a certain top percentage, let's say 50% of people who maybe attained a certain marks. And also it's also good to motivate strength, and also so awarding a certificate to a learner who's engaged maybe with a particular number of lessons in a particular time or in a particular way. So, but something to also think about when you're employing certificates as a motivator is using marks can be demotivating to learners, especially learners who are struggling, maybe who are not getting very high marks. And on that note, I think we recommend that you use certificates, for participation rather than awarding certificates for merit, so that you don't discourage a learner so much that they actually discontinue engaging with your program. So when you look at how often to reward, time is very important, especially when there's something that you're working towards. And when a learner has to wait for a very long time for them to be awarded a certificate, we risk losing them. And that's why we also risk now getting our churn rates very high. And for that reason, we recommend awarding certificates on a monthly basis, although this is highly dependent on the content that you're putting out there for your learners and how long you actually want them to engage with these content. So spacing out your content strategically, making sure that at very key milestones, which are not widely spread apart, you're able to reward these certificates to your learners at that time, once they reach at that point. And finally, when you're looking at implementing certificate as a motivator, it is very, okay, we all know that the allure of a certificate is being able to show it to people once you've completed a lesson or you've completed a certain course. But I know that has become challenging, especially now that learning has moved from in-person and now people are learning remotely. When you're looking at implementing this strategy, one thing that we try to see to is that the learners actually get to receive this certificate at the moment which they've completed, so they don't have to wait for very long periods, just as I mentioned. And how we do this, we can send certificates using emails or SMS, or even downloadable links. And we are very fortunate that our M-Shule platform is able to automate these, and we are able to create certificates maybe for our clients in the templates that they've provided, and we are able to issue these just as they've specified and reward according to their needs. And then also with technology, certificates now are able to be sent through SMS links, downloadable links that the learners are able to download and print their own certificates, or even be sent through like some sort of SMS menu that the learners can just click and be able to actually see their achievements, see how they performed, and see how they've been rewarded. And just to put this into context and give you maybe an instance where we've got to use certificates is we recently working on a program where we are working with youth learners who have just recently transitioned from in-person training, and now they are on to SMS digital training. And the uptake at first was a bit slow because, as Claire mentioned, there's that change of behavior that we all have to adapt to. And we just sat down and thought of how are we going to motivate these learners and actually make sure that they engage with the lessons and up to completion. So we introduced certificates as a motivator, and the engagement really increased with up to about 30% for the next course, which was starting in the new month. And that in turn also translated to the completion rates of these lessons, because these learners now are looking forward to stacking, their different certificates. And at the end of that program, they want to show, what they achieved through SMS learning. Yeah, and with that, I think we can go now to the second approach, individual learning motivating approach. And I'll want to talk about money. When we say money, we mean giving real or virtual financial incentives for learners for changing their behaviors. This can be used to buy other products in their lives, or redeem services in your program or your organization. Money works mostly as an extrinsic motivator, because they have to work to actually get this. And when you're thinking about money as a motivator, the different options that you can apply this is through maybe actual cash, mobile transfers, for example, using M-Pesa. It can be through phone airtime or data bundles. You can also think about using gift vouchers, or your learners can actually be accumulating some points, which they can redeem later, maybe for other services that you're offering in your organization, or just other independent services. But today we are going to talk about direct incentives and lottery incentives in form of money incentives. So how do we use these? We know that money is a very, very powerful motivator, especially in these times when you want people to react immediately to your call of action. So, and money is also it's also a very good strategy to use when you have like a big budget for incentives, and especially when you're working with adult learners, for example, who are doing maybe financial literacy programs. Money could be a very good thing and a very good incentive to use. But something that you should be very aware of is to use money sparingly, and also know that money is best for one-time engagements, because the moment once you introduce money as an incentive, your learners or your beneficiaries may take this as a prize for engaging with the activity that you want them to engage in, and it might be difficult in future to try and motivate them for using any other form of incentive. So that's why I mentioned earlier, this is good, especially when you're working on one-off programs, where one-off engagements with your beneficiaries or with your learners. So at M-Shule, how do we use money as a motivator? We first of all, at the scoping stage, we look at two main things. One, what are we rewarding with this money? And then finally, we also look at the implementing bit of it. So when you look at what to reward, this is highly dependent on the budget that we have, or our client's budget, and who we are actually targeting. So when you think of this, the different things that you will want to think about when you think of what to reward could be, for example, maybe we'll want to award X amount of money to each person who has reached a certain milestone or has done a certain activity. We also think about random lottery, and also we have also some, some tiered amounts for different milestones that our learners or our beneficiaries have reached at different points. But a rule of thumb is you should always find a balance between the budget and the number of prizes that you want to give out, because it's always good when you have, sometimes it works, and it's very strategic when you have small amounts that you can reward to a large number of people, as opposed as to when you just have one grand prize. This is because it gives your learners or your users the impression that and the encouragement that the winning chance is, like they have a chance to win. So that is something that you should also think about. And then also you should look at the type of learners that you're working with. Just to give an example is, for example, rewarding 100 shillings to a kiosk vendor will be a very good motivator, as opposed to awarding the same 100 shillings maybe to a group of maybe health professionals or school owners. So it's good to really look at the background of your learners or of your users. And then lastly, when you're going through the lottery system, which is one we're going to talk about today, is it gives that impression that to your learners that anyone can win. So it encourages that, that participation in the program or the activity that you actually want your learners to engage in. Yeah, and now when you're not just to think about the implementation bit of money as an incentive, one thing that you should think about is, if you want to handle this as an organization independently, you should be aware of the time and commitment that is needed for this. By that, I mean you should have someone who's constantly checking the progress and learning to be able to identify, select winners, communicate, and then finally award the winners with the prizes. And then, but also this is something that you can systemize, and you can systemize, for example, in M-Shule, we use our platform, which helps us to track these winners and the engagement, and then also helps us in like awarding the different winners. So that is another option that you can look at. And just to give you a scenario where we've used money as an incentive internally is, especially when we are working with research or data collecting projects, where we are dealing with where we are engaging our learners or our users one-off. We've used the lottery system, whereby we engage our learners for their resources or for their information, and then we randomly pick winners who are later, announced to the other learners, and this has actually elicited a lot of engagement and a lot of reaction to the same. So this is something that we've used and we've seen work, and yeah, my hope is that you'll get to try them and let us know how it goes for you. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Albina to take us through group learning strategies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for that. Now I'm going to take you through the group strategies. And the first one that we're going to talk about is competition. So what is competition? So competition works similarly to money, and especially lottery, as my colleague has mentioned, in that it inspires a desire to win, to achieve, and compared to others within a group. As compared to random lottery, it relates winning to direct input and effort by the learner. So why does this work? Gamification of learning makes learning fun, less of a chore, and plugs into the desire to do your best. So what are some of the options that you have when using the competition strategy? You can use leaderboards, you can use races. So races means first to complete certain lessons or first to complete a certain task. You can also use trivia for knowledge, certain types of tests. But today we are going to talk about leaderboards, which is scores that show the top ranks of learners across certain metrics. So when can you use this strategy? You can use this for any size groups, but we advise you to use a moderate size of group so that they can feel the effect and the impact of the strategy. You can also use this strategy among learners of any age. You can also use this strategy when you are low on budget for incentives and also low on budget for resources. So how do you do this? So when you're looking at how to implement it, you need to look at what to reward these learners. Also need to look at how many learners you want to reward and what are you going to use to rank them. And you also need just to look at how to implement this process. So when looking at what to reward, similar to certificate, you need to think closely about what behavior you want your learners to do. So using this strategy, there are so many options that you can use across your leaderboards. So for example, in M-Shule, we use if learners complete X number of questions, or when they complete X number of lessons, you can use high scores. You can also use longest streaks. So also, you also need to think about keeping the goal of getting on the leaderboards within the reach of the learners. Because if the reach of this goal is far away from the new learners or the learners who are behind, then getting on the leaderboards may not be something within their reach, and this will not motivate them at all. So we recommend you use number of questions or number of lessons completed, or you can also use streaks. So you also need to look at how many learners do you want to recognize or reward, and what ranks do you want to use. So this will depend on the amount of people that you want to motivate across your various projects. So you need to go back to your earlier considerations and look at, should you reset this reward to be weekly or monthly to make sure that everyone gets there. So we can, you also need to look at how many learners do you want to access? Because if the number is so large, you also need to look at a strategy to be able to access all of them. So you also need to look at the implementation process, because this can be a bit challenging, especially looking at tracking and setting up of trackers to ensure that quick communication and regular communication is sent out. So when you're implementing, you also need to look at how frequent do you need to download the list of learners, what metrics do you need to look at, and how do you communicate to the various groups. So you can use email to communicate, you can use downloadable links, as my colleague mentioned, and you can also use SMS. So in M-Shule, we have platforms that are already set up for this. So we just get the engagement tracking that helps us rank these learners, and we're able to send them out through SMS. We're also able to send them through WhatsApp and also through schools or organizations, or even share over social media. So the impact that this has had in M-Shule is, for example, we've used the leaderboards with our primary school learners, where we would share the leaderboards with the school head teachers through WhatsApp, and the school head teachers would download and print this and put it on the post, and the learners would really get excited, and they always wanted to be the student there. So one, it promotes the learners to be able to get excited to learn, and on our end, the learner interaction also rises. We also have a project where we've worked with health professionals, and we'd also share with them the leaderboards through WhatsApp, and they'd be able to share them across their WhatsApp groups. And this also made the health professionals feel appreciated, one, by their colleagues, and also feel appreciated by the organization. And this also gives them the psyche and the morale to continue learning across the courses and finish their courses in time. I will move on and talk about the second group incentive, and that is collaboration. So unlike competition, this really helps bring learners together and encourage them to build relations through skill building. This is incredibly effective technique, but also one that is most challenging to execute on during remote learning situations when learners are not physically in the same room and I don't have internet access. So today we are going to talk about remote collaboration strategies. So how does this work? Peer learning reintroduces positive social elements back into the digital learning platform. So what are some of the options that you can use? You can use phone trees. You can also use WhatsApp groups. You can use mentor and mentee programs. You can have small group meetings. You can have the neighborhood cluster or pods. But today we are going to talk about peer learning and the pods, mentors and mentees. So when can you use this strategy? You can use it when learners going through content have similar characteristics. For example, they work in the same organization, their career has the same paths, their nationality is the same, their business or their gender. You can also use this when learners may be clustered geographically. So for example, students in Nairobi, students in a certain estate, students in a certain country, or yes. We also can use this when learners are not in direct competition with each other, because this means they are working towards a common goal and not against each other. You can also use this with small to moderate size groups, or when groups can be broken down into such groups. You can also use this when in your organization you have the team and the time to handle the groups, because this requires a lot of human resources. So how do we do this? You need to look at the implementation process. So one, are these students or are these learners grouped? If they are grouped, if they're not grouped, you need to group them. And once they are grouped, you need to ensure that these groups are manageable. So when you're having a group of 10 and a group of 100, the group of 10 will be able to feel that personal relationship, but the group of 10 will feel a bit distant. So you also need to make sure within those groups, there are group leaders. So these group leaders are the ones that you will use to communicate the feedback and the targets that you want this particular group to achieve. So how can you do this virtually? For example, like right now during the pandemic, you will use these team leaders to communicate the targets and the feedback that you desire them to get. So you can be able to do this through WhatsApp or through SMSs. And once these leaders have received the information, it is now their responsibility to pass this down to the rest of the group. So make sure the members that are in the WhatsApp groups have received this information, and the members who are not in the WhatsApp groups have also received this. This also helps them to be able to own the project, one, and two, it also helps them to grow, because once they encounter a problem, they're able to raise it up in the group And once they've been able to raise it up, they also solve it within themselves. So we have also tried this in M-Shule, and we've also seen how effective it is, because we have done this with one of our adult training programs, where one person starts a WhatsApp group and they're able to adapt other learners. And in these groups, they're able to encourage each other, one, to finish the course, two, when matters arise, if they don't understand anything, they're able to discuss just within their groups. So this increases learner engagement on our end, and on their end, they're able to just build the relationship amongst themselves, and they're able to learn even as a group, and this empowers them greatly. So with that, I will also invite Claire to be able just to share more on costing. Yes, so we can go ahead and just talk about costing. So I know in every project that we have, it is very important to just have a look, sit down and just look at one, what are the cost implications of each and every project. So when looking at costing, you need to look at one, the strategy that you're using. You also need to look at the financial cost that this project or this strategy that you have chosen, and you also need to look at the resource cost. So what do I mean by resource cost? This means the manpower. So for example, for certificates, it might require less financial costs and less resource costs. But when you look at peer learning, it will require you to use a lot of financial costs and also look at a lot of resource costs. So you need to look, you need to merge the strategies that will be able to work best for your organization in terms of resources and in terms of financial costs. Yes, I will also now just take a chance to ask any questions that you may have, and also welcome Claire just to wrap it up.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thank you, Albina. I just had a video snafu, but we're back on. So yes, so as Albina said, when it comes to costing, you really want to think about not just the financial cost, but the human resource cost. And I think the graphic that we showed kind of breaks down you know, how you want to think about your investment, because of course, different things will have different results. And we really do, again, recommend combining some of these strategies into, you know, into one engagement. So you can also get different learners who are motivated by different things. So at this point, we're going to go over into our Q&A. I think we're keeping time very well. And I've been keeping track of some of these questions in the chat. So I'll start off with some of those. I've also been trying to answer along the way. So one of the, and then after that, we'll go to additional questions that people may have. So one of the questions that was asked, I believe by Anne, was talking about financial incentives for primary school students and how does that affect the relationships. And this also kind of goes to a question by Mr. Allen, who was talking about plagiarism. How do you know that children, if the children are learning, how do you ensure that they're actually the ones who are doing the content? So we actually have stayed away from actually doing financial incentives for elementary school students as of yet. But I will pass that over to my colleague Lydia to share some of her thoughts on that.
Thank you, Claire, and Alan and Anne for the good question. I think it's very important to note, and we also put a note there that, as Claire mentioned, we've not yet, or we are not actually even have a plan to engage young learners with monetary incentives. And I think, just as I said, for each and every form of these incentives that were mentioned today, it is important that you customize it for your group of learners and make sure that it is, one, appropriate, and two, it's sustainable. For example, when you're thinking about maybe incentivizing young elementary learners, I think leaderboards is a good incentive option. Looking at certificates is also a good option. These are options that we've used as M-Shule. But when you look at money as an incentive, this mostly works for adults, and especially adults who are engaging in, let's say, financial literacy programs, or, as I said, surveys or data collection programs. So this is something to be very aware of when you're using it, and make it appropriate for your target client, audience, users, learners.
Great, thank you so much, Lydia. And so now I'm seeing there are some questions around the gamification, and as Winston mentioned, that gamification of learning is a niche word right now. True, and there's a lot of resources coming up about how to make learning gamified, or like a game to engage students or adults in more fun when they're going through the content. But and then Winston said, my concern is it too tech enabled? Are there on-site ways to introduce gamification? So I can respond quickly to this one. Agreed. There's a lot of things and a lot of platforms that are providing, app and online based gamification. But what we have found, especially when working with learners who are offline, it's really about looking at what are kind of the games or the competitions that's happening within the school environment already, or happening within, the training environment already. And then seeing how you can do kind of a hybrid of those to introduce it in a way that's not also too unusual and requires behavior change in and of itself. So for example, I think my colleague mentioned a great example of, rankings, like leaderboards are something that, students are used to in the classroom. And so by giving them another platform with the leaderboard that the teacher can print out and hang on the wall, that kind of takes this digital leaderboard into the physical environment that people are used to. You can also look at things like, if there's like races, you could do something like, if people are used to trying to complete things over a certain amount of time, they're trying to be the first, you can track that on the platform, but then communicate it also in the physical environment. That's me thinking off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's other ways and other suggestions that people may have. Then we have a question from Michelle about parental engagement, how collaborative are parents, and how does this extrinsic motivation impact their engagement? So I'd like to pass this over to Albina to speak about this a bit more.
So if I get it right, how parents react to these incentives. So yes, so we have various responses from parents, but specifically from children with the leaderboard. So one good thing that we realized is at first we did not rank children as how they're ranked in school. That is number 1, 2, and 3. So we introduced leaderboards where we look at the child who has completed the most number of lessons. So most chances you'll find the learner who has finished most number of lessons has never been number 1 or 2 or 3. So once they're introduced and they are saying, oh, Michelle is the star of the week, they really get excited. And we also have parents who really call and say, I never knew my child can be rewarded such being top something. So they really get excited, and this even brings the parents closer and wants the parent to be able just to assist the learner get the best. So they move from being the best to completing certain lessons, and they move now to being the top in their class. So parents are very receptive to this, but as my colleague said, you need to look at what best works for your learners and how best what reaction you want to get out of it. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Albina. We have heard a lot of really exciting stories like that. And that's, again, where you're thinking about the different ways to incentivize and different behaviors that you want to motivate. So some things like grit and resilience and persistence are things that maybe learners aren't used to being rewarded for, but then it becomes a really exciting way that parents can, as Albina said, parents can see, here's the really great qualities that my child has. So that's been a really cool finding for us. Then we have a question from Stephen. How do you present an SMS certificate? When we say an SMS certificate, of course, there are always constraints of the 160 characters in an SMS. But what we do is send, one message proactively that will say, congratulations, your name has completed this course at the end of the course. And then also within our menu, so when people are engaging on our short code, there is also a section in some cases where it says like your certificates. And so when they select that option, they can then see or get the message that says, here are the courses you're completed and here's how well you did. So it's a kind of a creative way to provide certificates within those constraints. Then we have a question by Timothy, which I will also take. And then Lydia, I think I'm going to give you the next question from Eamon, I believe. So what's the best age to start engaging children in distance learning? This is a great question. I think ideally research shows that, probably after 4th grade or class 4, that's when you want to start, giving some like technology as a supplement to the learning. However, as we've seen, these are crazy times during COVID. And so we have actually been able to work with learners as young as class 1, all the way up to 75 years old. I don't know if that's actually our upper bound, but so there's really, it's really looking at all ages. But then the approach can be a bit different. So when we look at the lower primary school or learning content for younger children, we really look at, okay, how can we provide content actually to the parent to help them understand, what are the types of activities that we can do at home with my child, and then they can interact with these, parent mentorship or parent coaching courses, so that the parent can actually be more empowered to respond to their child's needs. So it's really a range, and really looking at also, what types of content are you trying to help learners engage with. So I think, Lydia, I'll pass this next question to you. How can we reach and support learners, families and teachers, especially in the midst of the pandemic?
I think I'll start by saying that Amon is in luck now that they're actually thinking about reaching teachers and parents and learners through SMS, because we know at least for every household, there's at least a feature phone. So it makes it easier to reach each of these beneficiaries that you intend to reach through SMS, because that is all you need. So if you're working towards reaching your beneficiaries through SMS, I think the most important thing would be, of course, getting their phone numbers, their names, and maybe, of course, preparing the content that you want to share out with them. And then that is something that we can work together. And of course, plugging into a system or a platform like M-Shule, and see how we can be able to help you disseminate that. And yeah. So yeah, I think those are some of the ways that you can look into that, as long as you have a robust resource, contact resource, and that we can also help you try to look at other additional ways where you can get some of these resources. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks so much, Lydia. Then our next question from Anne: does the M-Shule initiative support kids with special needs? So I will hand this to Albina to respond to.
Wow, such an amazing question. Thank you for that. So yes, M-Shule does look into supporting kids with special needs, in that we need to understand, one, the special need of the child, then two, get a way forward to support this child. So for example, if a learner is physically, has a physical, for example, they're either blind or they're either deaf. So what we've done is, one, for the deaf students, they're able to visualize. So we're able to support them with that. And when you're looking at learning disabilities, our platform is able to understand a learner's need and adapt with how a learner is. So if a learner is very slow, we have content for them so that will be able just to encourage them to move from this level to another level, and just encouraging them to be the best that they can be. So yes, we are able to support that, and that is something we can also help and add advise you better on it. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks so much. So now we have a question from Winston that I'm not quite getting you, Winston. Maybe you can clarify in the chat. Opinion about learning pods, and should a central control of what students learn not be viewed as mind control? Lots of conspiracies out there. Great, that's a great question, but maybe you can clarify a bit more about what you mean. So now, while Winston's clarifying, we'll go to a question from Cecilia, and we'll probably answer a few more questions. When we say content that we send out, is this a different metric from number of lessons taken, and how do you differentiate and track the two, or what's the difference? So Lydia or Albina, do either of you want to take this?
Albina, kindly help us to answer that.
Thank you so much, Claire. So kindly, can you clarify the question, please, again? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're looking at, for this question, and actually I can clarify this a bit. So when we look at content, the content, of course, means a lot of different things. And so when we look at the courses or the learning content that we're providing, we first look at, what are the knowledge and skills that a specific learner should be able to build. So if it's a primary school learner, literacy and numeracy skills, if it's an adult learner, maybe financial literacy. And then we break these down into micro courses and lessons that give, very specific types of content. And so when we send out these lessons, we send out first instructional information or scenarios that help people understand or contextualize the content. And then we also send out, different questions that they can respond to help them practice. So when we can look at, the number of lessons that people have merely engaged in, we can also look at how many questions that they answered. We can see if they got the question wrong and they had to get maybe a support or a scaffold to help them then respond to that question. So we can look at, from a very, very granular level, what were the specific questions and how many questions they interact with, out to how many lessons did they start and complete, out to how many weeks of learning or courses were they able to go through. So then you can also really, really track the engagement rates and the engagement levels. So I hope that answered that question. And now we can move to a question from Casper. So the question was, rewarding outcomes or learning achievements rewards better students faster. However, with education, it's key to keep struggling students engaged. So for that reason, you may want to reward effort rather than outcome so that weaker students keep engaged as well. Does M-Shule do this or recognize the problem? Yes, 100%. Because that's really, the power of personalized learning, and also this transition to the competency-based curriculum in Kenya, of really looking at, it's not the grades that you're getting. It's not, the number one being number one or number two in answering, all of your English questions correctly. That's very demotivating. When we were talking about marks a bit earlier, and certificates, we have to be careful to think about, are we just rewarding people who are getting A's? Because when you're a struggling student or you need a bit more help, that doesn't mean that you are not smart. It doesn't mean that you're not intelligent. It just means maybe you need a bit more time or a different approach to learning that content. So when we look at the achievement and certificates that we provide to our students, yes, we look at behavior. So we're looking at how many lessons did you complete? Did you keep going? Even when you got questions wrong and you had to do maybe the lesson again, did you stick it out? And, how long, how many weeks in a row were you learning? So we're really looking at, like, are you engaging with the content because you're learning, not because you're just trying to get high grades. So yes, because that definitely is a problem. And that's something that, we have the power, all of us have the power to dissuade. So now, okay, great. So now we have 1 minute left. So I think we'll take one more question, but thank you so much for all of these questions, and we'll definitely follow up to be able to answer these in an email afterwards. Quickly, yes, for Martina, we work offline. It's all SMS based actually. So there's no internet connectivity that's needed. It's all, if a phone can send and receive a text message, then you're able to learn on our platform. So then we can go to this last question from Timothy. How do we keep up with the syllabus since different learners from different schools have covered the year syllabus differently? How can one overcome that without leaving a learner hanging or boring a learner going through content that they've already covered in school or individually? Great question. So the way that we look at our primary school learning content is we've mapped out all of the skills that a learner should learn, not just within a particular year, but within their particular lifetime of education, or lifetime in their primary school. So then when we start engaging with a student, we know generally, according to the syllabus from the Ministry of Education, where should they be, probably what have they learned already, and we can start them with content there. But then based on the responses that we receive from them, we can start building up an understanding of their level of mastery and of their level of understanding using the adaptive learning technologies that we have on the back end. So we can say, okay, so this learner, maybe they're in the middle of the year, so they probably, they're in grade 5, they probably should know, this is just an example, pronouns. And then as we're giving them more advanced pronouns questions and content, if they're getting all those questions right, we can move them ahead more quickly to try to understand, okay, they already got pronouns, let's move on to adverbs. Okay, they got adverbs, let's go to complex sentences. But if they're getting them wrong, then we can say, okay, great, maybe they haven't covered this yet. Let's give them easier content in this knowledge map to try to match them with the content that's actually at their level. So I hope that answered that question. And yes, thank you so much for all of these other questions. Really, really appreciate all of your engagement and all of your feedback. We will be reaching out afterwards with a recording, with the slides, definitely, so you have a chance to look at it. We'll also aim to answer some of these other questions that we missed. And in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to us on this email or give us a call. We're really excited not just to see how we can work with anyone here, but also brainstorm and evaluate what are other ways that we can engage and motivate and excite learners, not just during COVID, but beyond, to use digital learning tools to help them build their skills. So with that, we're only 2 minutes over time. Thank you so much, everyone. We really, really appreciate you showing up. We really appreciate your questions, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Claire. Have a good day.